7 months pregnant, she ran into her ex-mother-in-law at the mall, and a detail around her neck revealed a shocking secret. The air conditioning in the mall felt like a cool blessing against the humid heat that was punishing the city that early afternoon. Ashley, with her hand resting on the prominent curve of her 7-month pregnant belly, walked with the slowness that pregnancy demanded, her eyes scanning the colorful displays in the baby stores. The mission was simple, almost a rite of passage: find the first items for her baby's nursery. A crib, maybe some cotton onesies, something she could afford on her salary as an administrative assistant, a small victory to celebrate the new life she was building on her own. It was supposed to be a peaceful morning, a moment of quiet connection with the baby kicking inside her, a break from the anxieties that had haunted her for months. But fate, with its cruel irony, had an ambush in store. As she passed in front of an upscale jewelry store, its lights making diamonds and gold sparkle like trapped stars, her heart skipped a beat. The air escaped her lungs. Coming out of the store, with a velvet bag in hand and a satisfied smile on her lips, was Mrs. Evelyn, her ex-mother-in-law. Beside her, a friend with impeccably styled hair laughed at something she said. But it wasn't her presence that paralyzed Ashley. It was what adorned her neck. Gleaming under the artificial lighting, an antique gold necklace with a delicate cameo pendant rested on her skin as if it had always belonged to her. Ashley knew every detail of that piece: the handmade clasp, the slight wear on the chain, the profile of the lady carved into the pendant. It was her maternal grandmother's necklace, a family heirloom that had mysteriously disappeared from her home months earlier, just before her world fell apart. That necklace wasn't just jewelry. It had been the spark that ignited the ruins of her marriage. The sight of that piece, worn with such casual pride by the woman who had humiliated her, was like a punch to the gut. The world around Ashley seemed to spin in slow motion. The sound of conversations, the mall's background music, all turned into a distant hum. A wave of nausea hit her, and she instinctively pulled her light jacket tighter against her body, as if she could hide herself, hide the pregnancy, hide the torrent of painful memories flooding her. For a moment, she wanted to run, turn, and flee from that golden glow that seemed to mock her pain. But her swollen, aching feet were rooted to the polished marble floor. She couldn't move. She was trapped, hypnotized by the image of that jewel that represented the greatest injustice. Mrs. Evelyn, oblivious to the storm brewing just a few feet away, continued her animated conversation, gesturing in a way that made the necklace sway, catching the light and casting small reflections that stung Ashley's eyes. Each sparkle was a stab, reopening wounds she thought were, if not healed, at least scarring over. In that moment, under the mall's cold lights, Ashley wasn't just a soon-to-be mom picking out a crib. She was once again the accused woman, the disbelieved wife, the victim of a theft that no one, especially the man she loved, believed had happened. That necklace around Mrs. Evelyn's neck wasn't just metal and stone. It was living proof of betrayal, manipulation, and lies that had destroyed her life. And the way her ex-mother-in-law displayed it, with the naturalness of someone wearing something rightfully theirs, was the cruelest provocation. It was a silent declaration of victory, a clear message that she had won, and Ashley had lost. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing his mother's anguish, and that movement brought her back to reality. The pain turned into a cold flame of anger. She couldn't run. Not anymore. That golden glow around Mrs. Evelyn's neck acted like a key, unlocking a dark, dusty compartment in Ashley's memory, a place where she had imprisoned the darkest months of her life. The mall scene dissolved, and she was transported back to the living room of her old house, the air heavy with tension that could be cut with a knife. The memory came with brutal clarity, bringing with it the scent of the lavender disinfectant that the housekeeper Sophia used, and the sound of rain pattering against the windows. It was on a grey afternoon like that one that chaos set in. Ashley had just returned from a doctor's appointment, her heart still floating with the news of the pregnancy, a secret she planned to share with Ryan that night over a special dinner. But when she entered her bedroom to store the small velvet chest where she kept her grandmother's jewelry, she found it ransacked. The necklace, the pearl earrings, the ring with the small sapphire. everything was gone. The initial panic gave way to a frantic search. She rummaged through drawers, looked under the bed, scoured the closet, her heart pounding against her ribs in a desperate rhythm. The jewelry wasn't valuable just for the gold, but for the history it carried. It was the last physical link to her grandmother, the materialization of a love that transcended death. When Ryan arrived, he found her in tears, the room in disarray. His initial reaction was concern, but the atmosphere shifted dramatically when Mrs. Evelyn, who by coincidence was stopping by for a visit, entered the scene. Upon hearing about the disappearance, her mother-in-law's expression wasn't surprise, but a calculated dismay. Her eyes, however, gleamed with a cold, analytical light. It was she who first planted the seed of doubt. "Ashley, dear, you've been so forgetful lately," she said with a falsely smooth voice. "With this pregnancy, the hormones, maybe you put them somewhere else and don't remember." Ashley denied it vehemently. She knew where she kept them, always in the same place. The argument that followed was the beginning of the end. Ashley, with her intuition screaming, dared to suggest that maybe someone with access to the house had taken them. Her eyes unintentionally landed on Mrs. Evelyn, who frequented the house with a freedom that sometimes bothered her. Her mother-in-law's reaction was immediate and theatrical. She clutched her chest, offended. "Are you accusing me, Ashley? After everything I've done for you?" From that point, Mrs. Evelyn took control of the narrative. With surgical coldness, she diverted any suspicion from herself and directed it toward the only other vulnerable person in the house, Sophia, the housekeeper who had worked for them for nearly a year, a simple and honest woman whose only flaw was her loyalty. "I don't want to be unfair," said Mrs. Evelyn in the tone of someone being the fairest person, "but what about Sophia? Didn't she complain about debts the other day?" The accusation was baseless and cruel. Sophia, when confronted, cried. She denied it with the force of someone defending their own soul, her eyes welling up with a truth that only Ashley seemed to see. "Mrs. Ashley, for God's sake, I would never do that. I've watched you grow up. I would never touch what's yours," she begged. But the seed of poison had already been planted in Ryan's mind. Pressured by his mother, torn between his sobbing wife and the maternal figure he had always revered, Ryan chose the path of least resistance. He didn't want to believe his mother was a thief, and the alternative, blaming the housekeeper, seemed more palatable, easier. Sophia was fired the next day, leaving through the back door with a small cardboard box and her dignity in tatters. Ashley felt complicit in a terrible injustice, but her voice had been silenced by her mother-in-law's authority and her husband's hesitation. That episode opened a crack in the marriage, and Mrs. Evelyn, sensing the opportunity, began to work on it with the patience of a craftsman of evil. She started undermining Ashley's credibility systematically. Casual comments about her forgetfulness and her excessive emotionality became frequent. "She's paranoid, my son. This pregnancy is messing with her head," she whispered to Ryan in private conversations. The manipulation reached a new level when Mrs. Evelyn, using her vast network of contacts, got a psychologist she trusted to issue discreet but devastating reports. The documents, which Ryan saw accidentally on his mother's desk, didn't diagnose a severe mental illness, but insinuated a picture of emotional instability, anxiety, and tendencies to create fantasies. They suggested that Ashley wasn't in full condition to make important decisions, that she needed support and supervision. And between the lines, the message was clear. She wasn't fit to be a mother. This web of lies suffocated the love that still existed. Ryan, a good but weak man, began to see his wife through the distorted filter created by his mother. Ashley's genuine concerns about the theft and the injustice done to Sophia were now interpreted as symptoms of her paranoia. Her tears, as proof of her imbalance. He loved her, loved the idea of the child on the way, but the poison of doubt corroded his feelings. He felt exhausted from the conflicts, the constant tension. The peace he craved seemed impossible beside the woman his mother painted as a well of problems. The final conversation was one late afternoon, the setting sun casting long shadows through the apartment. Ryan, with his eyes down, avoiding Ashley's gaze, delivered the sentence. "I think we need some time," he said, the words coming out with difficulty. "Time for you to calm down, for us to think." He already had the solution, probably suggested by his mother, a small rented apartment in her name, a place where Ashley could go until things settled down. It wasn't a request, it was a veiled order. It was the final humiliation, evicted from her own home, pregnant, disbelieved by the man who swore to protect her. She packed a suitcase, the house's silence broken only by her stifled sobs. As she left, she looked back and saw Ryan standing in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion and pain. He didn't stop her. Months passed. Months of loneliness, solo doctor's appointments, sleepless nights in the impersonal apartment. Communication with Ryan was sporadic, always mediated by Mrs. Evelyn's shadow. And then one day, during a rare call, he mentioned something in passing that left her perplexed. "You know what's funny? Mom rehired Sophia, said she missed her, that maybe she was unfair." Ryan found it odd but didn't question it. For him, it was just one of his mother's eccentricities. For Ashley, however, that information was like a puzzle piece that didn't fit anywhere. Why rehire the woman she herself accused of theft? Unless the accusation was never real, unless it was just a piece in a much larger game. And now there in the middle of the mall, the final piece clicked into place with an audible snap. The necklace, the irrefutable proof that unmasked the whole theater. Mrs. Evelyn hadn't just stolen her jewelry. She had stolen her peace, her reputation, her marriage, and nearly her sanity. She had orchestrated every step of that ordeal with a cruelty Ashley never imagined possible. The anger she felt before gave way to an icy clarity. The pain was still there, deep and throbbing, but now there was something more, there was purpose. The truth was no longer buried. It was there, shining around her ex-mother-in-law's neck, waiting to be exposed. The baby moved again, a gentle but firm reminder that she was no longer fighting just for herself. She was fighting for him, for his story, for his right to be born into a world where his mother wasn't crazy, but a woman who had been wronged and was finally ready to fight. The hum in her ears stopped. The world came back into focus. Ashley took a deep breath, the mall's cold air filling her lungs with new determination. She wouldn't confront her there. No. Revenge, she realized, wasn't a dish served cold. It was a feast prepared meticulously. The walk from the mall to Brooke's apartment was done in a trance. Ashley didn't remember crossing the streets, waiting at the traffic lights, climbing the 3 flights of stairs to her best friend's door. Her mind was elsewhere, stuck on the image of that necklace, Mrs. Evelyn's casual laugh, the crushing weight of the injustice now revealing itself in all its monstrous extent. When Brooke opened the door, she found a pale Ashley, with wide eyes and labored breathing. It didn't take many words. The urgency on her friend's face was a silent alarm. "Ash, what happened? The baby? Are you okay?" Brooke asked, pulling her inside and guiding her to the soft couch. Ashley collapsed onto the cushions, the words stuck in her throat. She just shook her head, the tears she'd held back so fiercely at the mall finally overflowing, hot and bitter. Brooke, her friend since high school, the rock amid all her storms, sat beside her, wrapping her in a protective hug. She waited, with the patience only true friendship knows, until Ashley's sobs subsided into an exhausted tremor. "I saw her," Ashley whispered, her voice hoarse. "Brooke, I saw Mrs. Evelyn. And she was wearing it. She was wearing my grandmother's necklace." Brooke frowned, the initial confusion giving way to a dark understanding. She had been Ashley's confidant through the entire painful process of the jewelry's disappearance and the subsequent destruction of her marriage. She had never believed Sophia was guilty and always suspected Mrs. Evelyn's character, but had no way to prove it. "Are you sure, Ash?" "Absolutely sure." "Sure." Ashley laughed, a joyless sound. "Brooke, I'd recognize that necklace in the dark. The way the chain twists near the clasp, the small scratch on the side of the cameo. It was it. She was wearing it like a trophy, laughing. She was laughing." The pain in Ashley's voice turned into a cold fury. The sadness became a steel determination. "She didn't just steal the jewelry, Brooke. She stole my life. She made me look crazy to Ryan, to everyone. She destroyed my marriage, kicked me out of my home, pregnant. And for what? Greed? Power? Brooke held her friend's hands, her own eyes shining with indignation. That woman is a monster. But now she made a mistake. A stupid, arrogant mistake. And we're going to make her pay for it. That afternoon, in Brooke's small apartment, between cups of chamomile tea and the smell of apple pie baking in the oven, the pain turned into strategy. The sadness became a battle plan. They couldn't just confront Mrs. Evelyn. Ashley's word, the unstable ex-daughter-in-law against the wealthy, respected matriarch of the city, wouldn't be worth anything. They needed more. They needed proof. Proof so clear, so irrefutable, that not even Ryan, with his blind loyalty to his mother, could deny it. "We need photos," Brooke said, her practical mind already working at full speed. Not just one, several. In different places with different outfits. We need to show it wasn't casual use, but that she appropriated the piece. And not just the necklace. You said other jewelry disappeared, right? Ashley nodded, her mind clearing. The pearl earrings my grandma wore at her wedding, and a small sapphire ring she gave me when I turned 15. Great. Let's hunt, Brooke declared, with a dangerous gleam in her eyes. We're going to become the worst paparazzi that witch has ever seen. The plan was put into action the next day. Brooke, who worked as a freelance photographer, had the perfect equipment. A professional camera with a long-range lens. The first opportunity came 2 days later. A note in the local newspaper's society column announced a charity brunch at the city's most exclusive country club, an event Mrs. Evelyn, with her need to maintain appearances as a charitable grande dame, certainly wouldn't miss. Ashley felt a knot in her stomach, just thinking about getting near that environment, but Brooke was firm. You don't have to go in. Stay in the car. I'll handle the rest. They parked across the street, in a spot with a prime view of the club's entrance. Ashley, her heart pounding, hunkered down in the passenger seat. Half an hour later, Mrs. Evelyn's luxury car pulled up to the portico. She stepped out, majestic in a linen dress, her hair perfectly coiffed, a polished smile for the valet. And there they were, on her earlobes shining under the midday sun, the unmistakable pearl earrings. Got it, Brooke whispered, her eye glued to the camera viewfinder, the shutter clicking like a silent machine gun. Close up. Perfect focus. The pearl has that small imperfection at the base, right? Yes, Ashley replied, her voice choked. My grandma said it was the mark of its authenticity. The hunt continued over the following weeks. They became shadows, following Mrs. Evelyn's steps around the city. They discovered her routine, the salon on Tuesdays, tea with friends at the downtown hotel on Thursdays, Sunday Mass at the cathedral. At each occasion, a new puzzle piece revealed itself. At a dinner that Brooke managed to photograph from the window of a neighboring building, Mrs. Evelyn wore the sapphire ring, the small blue point gleaming on her hand as she raised a wine glass. The photos were sharp, undeniable. Mrs. Evelyn's arrogance was her downfall. She didn't hide the jewelry. She flaunted it, convinced her crime was perfect, that the victim was neutralized and discredited. While Brooke collected evidence from the present, Ashley delved into the past. She went to her parents' house, a place she'd avoided in recent months to not worry them with her situation. In the dusty attic, she found what she was looking for, a large, dark wooden trunk, guardian of her family's memories. Carefully, she opened it. The smell of cedar and thyme filled her nostrils. Inside, among yellowed baptism dresses and letters tied with satin ribbons, were the photo albums. She spent hours flipping through the pages, the black and white and sepia photos telling the story of a life she only knew from tales. And then she found it, a photo of her grandmother, young and smiling, at a New Year's Eve party in the 1960s, and around her neck, unmistakable, was the necklace. The image was a bit faded, but the cameo's design was clear. In another photo from her parents' wedding, there was her grandmother again, older now, wearing the pearl earrings. And in a photo from her own baptism, her grandmother held her in her arms, and on her finger the small sapphire ring shone. Ashley felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her over. It was no longer just her word. It was her grandmother's word, speaking through time. She took the photographs, her hands trembling. The link was formed. The past and present connected, weaving a net from which Mrs. Evelyn couldn't escape. She snapped pictures of the old photos with her phone, sending them to Brooke, who placed them side by side with the ones she'd taken. The comparison was devastating. The same clasp, the same imperfection in the pearl, the same ring design. It was visual proof, a complete narrative of the theft and appropriation. With the dossier of photos in hand, a new strength took hold of Ashley. The fragile, humiliated woman who had been kicked out of her home was disappearing, giving way to a lioness protecting her cub and her heritage. She knew the next step was the hardest and most dangerous, confronting Ryan. She didn't know how he'd react. Denial might still be stronger, but she had to try. For her son, for her grandmother's memory, for her own dignity. "I'm ready," she said to Brooke, the digital dossier safe on a USB drive and the printed photos in a plain envelope. "I'm going to talk to him." Brooke looked at her, a mix of pride and concern in her eyes. "Are you sure? He might—" "I know," Ashley interrupted. "I know he might side with her again. But this time I don't have just my word. I have the truth in images. And if that's not enough to wake him up, then I'll know, once and for all, that the man I married is truly gone. And I can finally move on, alone but free." She picked up the phone, her heart beating a war rhythm. She searched for Ryan's number in her contacts, hesitated for a second, took a deep breath, and pressed the call button. The call to battle had been made. The coffee shop chosen for the meeting was neutral ground, a small spot in the city centre with dark wooden tables and the comforting aroma of freshly ground beans. It was a territory that belonged neither to the happy past of the couple nor to the painful present of the separation. Ashley arrived first, a deliberate strategy to control the environment, to feel ownership of the space, even if for just a few minutes. She chose a table in the back, away from the window, a discreet corner that offered privacy. The plain envelope with the printed photos rested in her lap, heavy as a sentence. Each kick from the baby in her belly seemed a reminder of what was at stake, a small wave of courage pushing her forward. When Ryan entered, the little bell above the door tinkled, and Ashley's heart gave a painful leap. He looked the same, and yet completely different. The same tousled hair she used to fix with her fingers, the same broad shoulders under the button-down shirt, but there was a tension in his jaw, a weariness in his eyes she didn't recognize. He scanned the place for her, and when their gazes met she saw a flash of something she couldn't decipher. Surprise, guilt, maybe even longing. He walked to the table, his steps hesitant, like a man unsure of the ground he was treading. "Ashley," he said, his voice lower than she remembered, You look beautiful." The compliment, which in other times would have made her smile, now sounded empty, almost an insult. Beautiful. She felt like a battlefield, exhausted and marked by invisible scars. She just nodded, a dry gesture, and indicated the chair across from her. "Sit down, Ryan." He obeyed, the silence between them filled only by the murmur of other tables and the hiss of the espresso machine. A waiter approached, but Ashley waved him away. There would be no coffee, no small talk. She was there for a purpose, and delaying the moment would only prolong the agony. "I didn't call you here to talk about us, or how I'm doing," she began, her voice steady, surprising herself. "I called you because I need you to see something. I need you, for the first time in a long time, to really look." Without waiting for a response, she opened the envelope and spread the photographs across the table, creating a mosaic of betrayal. On one side, the sharp, colorful photos of Mrs. Evelyn, taken by Brooke, her mother-in-law, at the charity brunch with the pearl earrings, at the dinner with the sapphire ring, and the most damning of all, the mall photo, the cameo necklace shining around her neck. On the other side, the old photos, in black and white and sepia, of her grandmother, wearing exactly the same jewelry. Ryan looked at the images, his brow furrowed in confusion. He picked up one of his mother's photos, then one of Ashley's grandmother. He compared them, his eyes moving quickly from one to the other. A muscle in his cheek began to twitch. "What is this, Ashley? A montage?" he asked, but his voice lacked conviction. It was the question of a man who already knew the answer, but refused to accept it. "Montage," Ashley repeated, her voice laced with icy irony. "Look closely, Ryan. Look at the imperfection in the pearl. Look at the clasp on the necklace. Look at the ring's design. They're the same jewelry. The jewelry that disappeared from our house. The jewelry for which you let your mother call me crazy and fire an innocent woman." He pushed the photos away as if they burned his fingers. He leaned back in the chair, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of despair. "This doesn't prove anything. My mom, she could have similar jewelry. It's a coincidence." "Coincidence?" The word exploded from Ashley, louder than she intended. "A coincidence that she has 3 identical pieces to mine that vanished. A coincidence that she started wearing them right after I was kicked out of the house? Open your eyes, Ryan. For God's sake, for everything we once were, open your eyes." He shook his head, denying not to her but to himself. The idea that his mother, the woman who raised him, the figure he had always placed on a pedestal, was capable of such an act, was an earthquake threatening to destroy the foundations of his world. It was easier to believe Ashley was mistaken, that there was a logical explanation, than to accept the monstrosity of the truth. "My mum wouldn't do this," he whispered, the words sounding like a fragile prayer. "She's not a thief." Ashley felt a wave of exhaustion. She had prepared for the denial, but the reality was more painful than the anticipation. She saw in his eyes not malice, but a deep weakness, an inability to confront the ugliness hiding beneath the surface of his perfect family. With a sigh, she gathered the photos, hope withering inside her. "I thought the images would speak for themselves. I thought for our son, you'd bother to doubt her, at least once," she said, her voice now devoid of anger, just tinged with infinite sadness. "But I see the power she has over you is greater than any truth, greater than me, greater than our baby." She stood up, the chair scraping noisily on the floor. Ryan remained seated, paralyzed, his face pale. He didn't try to stop her as she turned and walked toward the exit, leaving him behind with the ghost of the truth on the table. Ryan stayed in the coffee shop for nearly an hour, staring at the empty spot where Ashley had sat. The images from the photos were etched into his retina. The similarity was undeniable. The coincidence was absurd. Ashley's words echoed in his mind. "Open your eyes." He returned home disturbed, his head a mess of loyalty and doubt. The image of his mother, smiling and affectionate, battled against the image of the woman in the photos, flaunting jewelry that didn't belong to her. Upon entering the apartment he shared with his mother since the break in his marriage, he found her in the living room watching a soap opera. She greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, asking about his day. He responded with monosyllables, his mind distant. He observed her, looking for a sign, a crack in the facade. But she was impeccable, the embodiment of elegance and calm. Could Ashley be so wrong? Could she have somehow been mistaken? That night, he couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, the internal conflict consuming him. Around 2 in the morning, he got up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As he passed through the hallway, he saw a sliver of light coming from his mother's room. He stopped, his heart racing. The door was ajar, and he could see her. Mrs. Evelyn wasn't sleeping. She was in front of her large mahogany wardrobe, and in her hands were small velvet boxes. With almost reverent care, she opened them one by one, admiring the contents for a moment, before closing them and storing them in a hidden compartment at the back of the wardrobe. Ryan held his breath. He couldn't see what was inside the boxes, but the furtive gesture, the discretion with which she handled them in the middle of the night, sent a chill down his spine. He retreated to his room, his heart hammering. The doubt Ashley had planted began to sprout, its roots spreading and cracking the hard shell of denial. He waited what seemed like an eternity, until the light in her room went out and the deep silence of the early morning took over the apartment. Then, driven by an impulse he could no longer control, he got up again. On tiptoe, he went to his mother's room. The door was closed but not locked. He opened it with infinite care, the soft creak of the hinge sounding like thunder in his ears. Mrs. Evelyn was sleeping deeply, her breathing regular and peaceful. He approached the wardrobe, his heart in his mouth. He opened the door and felt around the back where he'd seen her store the boxes. His fingers found a loose wooden panel. He removed it, and there it was. Not a safe, but a secret compartment. Inside, nestled in velvet, were the boxes. With trembling hands, he took the first one. Opened it. Inside, the pearl earrings. The small imperfection at the base, exactly as Ashley had described. He took the second, the sapphire ring, the third, the cameo necklace. It was all there. Ashley's jewelry, the proof of the crime. The impact was devastating. The air seemed sucked from his lungs. He leaned against the wardrobe to keep from falling. The truth, in all its ugliness, hit him with the force of a runaway train. His mother. His mother was a thief, a manipulator, a liar. She hadn't just stolen. She had destroyed Ashley's life, their life, to cover her act. The psychologist's reports, Sophia's firing, the accusations of paranoia, everything fit into a terrifying pattern. He looked at the woman sleeping peacefully in the bed, and for the first time in his life he didn't see his mother. He saw a stranger, a predator, and the nausea he felt was from the poison he had allowed her to feed him for so long. The denial shattered into 1,000 pieces, and beneath the wreckage only the crushing shame of his own blindness remained. The night didn't end for Ryan. Sleep became an impossibility, a luxury his newly awakened and tormented conscience wouldn't allow. He returned to his room, but not to bed. He placed the 3 velvet boxes on the desk under the cold light of a lamp and stared at them as if they were artifacts from a lost civilization, symbols of a world he no longer knew. Each piece was a nail in his own coffin of ignorance. The soft glow of the pearls, the blue sparkle of the sapphire, the polished gold of the cameo. Everything seemed to mock him, whispering the truth he had refused to hear. The image of Ashley in the coffee shop, her eyes full of deep sadness but also a strength he had never seen before, overlaid the image of his mother sleeping peacefully in the next room. The dissonance was maddening. How could he have been so blind? How could he have traded the woman carrying his child for a web of lies woven by the person he trusted most? The shame was a physical sensation, a weight on his chest that made breathing difficult. He remembered every harsh word he said to Ashley, every time he accused her of being too emotional, every time he defended his mother. Each memory was a stab. He remembered Sophia's tearful face, the housekeeper, swearing her innocence while he, impassive, just watched her firing. He had been complicit, not out of malice, but out of cowardly weakness, a childish need to preserve his mother's immaculate image. And the price of that weakness had been the destruction of his own family. The sun began to lighten the sky, painting the horizon in shades of grey and orange, but for Ryan, the world had never seemed so dark. He knew what he needed to do. There was no other path. Reparation, however impossible it seemed, had to begin. He didn't wait for his mother to wake up. With the jewelry safely tucked in the inner pocket of his coat, he left the apartment before 6 in the morning, leaving behind the life he knew. He drove aimlessly for a while, the city still waking, the streets empty. His mind, however, was a whirlwind. He needed to see Ashley. He needed to place those jewels in her hands, not as a trophy of his discovery, but as the first installment of a plea for forgiveness he knew might never be fully accepted. He stopped at a 24-hour diner, bought a strong coffee, and with still trembling hands called her. Ashley answered on the 3rd ring, her voice sleepy and cautious. "Hello. Ashley. It's me. Ryan." There was silence on the other end, a heavy silence, full of unspoken questions. "I know it's early," he continued, his voice choked, "but I need to see you, please, it's important. I need to give you something." She hesitated. He could feel her distrust through the phone. "What do you want, Ryan?" "The truth," he said, the word coming out as a sigh. "I just need 10 minutes. I'll come over. Please. Ash?" Maybe it was the desperation in his voice, or maybe the simple mention of the word truth, but she agreed. 10 minutes. The door will be open. The drive to her small apartment was the longest of his life. Every red light seemed like torture. Upon arriving, he saw the door ajar, as she had promised. He pushed it gently and entered. Ashley was in the small living room, standing, wearing a robe, her hand protectively over her belly. Her eyes showed no anger but a deep weariness, as if she were preparing for another battle she didn't want to fight. He said nothing. He just approached, stopped at a respectful distance, and slowly pulled the 3 velvet boxes from his pocket. He extended them to her in the palm of his hand. Ashley's eyes widened. She looked from the boxes to his face and back to the boxes. With a trembling hand she took the first one, the one with the necklace, opened it. A sob escaped her lips, a sound that was a mix of pain and relief. She opened the second and the third. Tears began to stream down her face, silent and uncontrollable. She caressed each piece with her fingertips, as if reuniting with old friends she thought were dead. "Where? How?" she whispered, her voice broken. "In her room. Hidden," he replied, shame making his own voice falter. "I didn't believe you. Even with the photos, I didn't want to believe, but I saw her, stashing the boxes in the middle of the night. And I found them." Ashley closed her eyes, the tears continuing to flow. It was validation, the final proof that she wasn't crazy. That her intuition had been right all along. That moment was more than just recovering her jewelry, it was recovering her own identity, her sanity. With a new wave of determination, she turned and walked to a small wooden trunk in a corner of the room. The same trunk she had rummaged through in her parents' attic. She opened it and pulled out the old photo albums. "I want you to see one more thing," she said, her voice firmer now. She opened one of the albums to the page with the photo of her grandmother, smiling at the New Year's Eve party, the cameo necklace around her neck. "Look at her, Ryan. Look at the joy in her eyes. This necklace was a gift from my grandfather. He designed it. It was the symbol of their love." She turned the page, showing the photo from her parents' wedding, with her grandmother wearing the pearl earrings. "These pearls. My grandma wore them on the happiest day of her life. She told me they held the promise of enduring love." She pointed to the last photo from her own baptism. "And this ring was the first piece of jewelry she gave me. She put it on my finger and said that as long as I wore it, a piece of her love would always be with me." Ryan looked at the photos, his face contorting in pain. The stories behind the jewelry, the lives and loves they represented, made his mother's theft even more heinous. It wasn't just metal and stones. It was the soul of a family she had profaned. It was in that moment that the puzzle completed itself in Ryan's mind with brutal, blinding clarity. It wasn't just about the jewelry. The jewelry was the catalyst. He connected all the dots, all the pieces that had seemed disconnected before. The subtle manipulation, the forged reports from the psychologist friend of his mother, the cold, calculated accusation against Sophia, and the most bizarre piece of all, the inexplicable rehiring of the same housekeeper. Everything made sense now. His mother needed a scapegoat to cover the theft. After Ashley was removed and the dust settled, she rehired Sophia, perhaps out of a mix of guilt and the need to keep someone who knew the house's secrets close. An act of control disguised as benevolence. Every action of his mother hadn't been random. It had been a deliberate move in a cruel game, whose sole objective was one: to destroy Ashley and take what she desired. The true culprit, the architect of all his misery, had always been Mrs. Evelyn. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, leaning against the wall. The world he knew, the image of his family, the veneration for his mother, all crumbled to dust. He looked at Ashley, who now held the jewelry to her chest, her face wet with tears, and saw her truly for the first time in months. He saw her strength, her resilience, the pain he had helped inflict, and the prominent belly, which before was a reminder of a problem, now was living proof of the family he had almost lost forever. The dam of his composure finally broke. A sob tore from his throat, and he slid down the wall to the floor, his face in his hands. The tears came, hot and shameful. Tears of regret, of mourning for lost innocence, of a pain so deep it seemed it would split him in half. He cried for the woman he loved and had abandoned. He cried for the son he had almost renounced. He cried for his own mother's betrayal, and above all, he cried for his own unforgivable weakness. The sound of Ryan's sobs filled the small apartment. a raw, broken sound that seemed to come from the depths of a shattering soul. Ashley watched him from across the room, the man she had loved, now reduced to a crumpled figure on the floor, and felt no triumph. There was no satisfaction in his pain, only a melancholic emptiness. Victory, she realized, had a bittersweet taste. She had recovered her jewelry, her truth, but the process had left a trail of destruction that might never be fully cleaned. With a sigh carrying the weight of the last months, she approached and sat on the couch near where he was, waiting for the storm of his regret to pass. After long minutes, Ryan's sobs subsided, turning into trembling, irregular breathing. He lifted his face, his eyes red and swollen, the expression of a lost man. "Ashley, forgive me," he whispered, his voice hoarse and almost inaudible. "I know that. I know asking for forgiveness is nothing. It doesn't erase what I did, what I let her do. I was blind. I was a coward. I abandoned you when you needed me most. I abandoned our son before he was even born. I have no excuses. There's no excuse in the world for my weakness." Each word was a confession, a self-flagellation that, though painful to hear, was necessary. Ashley listened in silence, her heart divided. One part of her, the wounded and humiliated part, wanted to scream, to throw in his face every lonely night, every tear shed, every pitying look she received on the street. But another part, the part that still remembered the man she fell in love with, and the mother she was about to become, saw only a broken man who had finally woken from a long nightmare. "You weren't just weak, Ryan," she said, her voice calm but firm as steel. "You were complicit. You chose the easy path. You chose to believe the comfortable lie over the inconvenient truth. And that choice almost cost me everything, not just the jewelry. It almost cost me my sanity. It almost cost this baby the chance to have a whole mother." He didn't defend himself. He just nodded, accepting each word as the penance he deserved. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. But regret isn't enough. I need to fix this. I need to confront her." The mention of Mrs. Evelyn sent a chill through Ashley. The idea of a direct confrontation scared her, but she saw in Ryan's eyes a new determination, the spark of the man she once admired. The confrontation didn't happen in the luxurious apartment, but on neutral ground. Ryan's lawyer's office, an older, upright man who had known the family for years. Ryan scheduled the meeting under the pretext of discussing urgent family matters. Mrs. Evelyn arrived impeccable as always, a condescending smile on her lips, perhaps expecting to discuss the details of a new investment. Her expression changed the instant she saw Ashley sitting beside Ryan. The smile faltered, replaced by a mask of coldness. "What is she doing here?" she asked, her voice hissing, completely ignoring Ashley's presence. Ryan didn't hesitate. He placed the 3 velvet boxes on the polished mahogany desk, opening them one by one. "I think you know what she's doing here, Mum." Mrs. Evelyn's eyes widened for a fraction of a second at the sight of the jewelry. It was a minimal lapse, almost imperceptible, but for Ryan, who now watched her with open eyes, it was a confession. She recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "Well, Ryan, what a surprise. You found them. I told Ashley she probably stored them somewhere and forgot. Where were they anyway?" The audacity was breathtaking. "They were in a false bottom in your wardrobe," Ryan said, his voice low and cutting, "where I saw you stashing them in the middle of the night." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Mrs. Evelyn's face paled. The denial began, first with disdain, then with fury. "This is absurd. It's her. She put this in your head. That girl is trying to tear us apart, destroy our family." "What family, Mom?" Ryan exploded, standing up. "The family you destroyed when you stole from a pregnant woman, when you accused her of being crazy, when you bribed a doctor to forge reports, when you blamed an innocent woman and then rehired her to keep control. What the hell kind of family are you talking about?" Each accusation was a blow. Mrs. Evelyn tried to argue, contradicted herself, stammered. Her castle of lies, so carefully built, crumbled under the weight of the truth exposed by her own son. Seeing that denial wouldn't work, she changed tactics, appealing to emotional blackmail. "I did everything for you, Ryan, for our name. You were going to have a child with that unbalanced woman. I was protecting you." It was the last straw. "Protecting me?" he laughed, a bitter sound devoid of humor. "You didn't protect me. You used me. You poisoned me. You don't care about my son. You care about your legacy, your status, your damn pride. But it's over. It's over, Mom." That day, Ryan cut the ties. Not just emotional, but financial. He resigned from his position in the family business, gave up his inheritance, and left that office, leaving behind not just his mother, but the entire life of privileges and lies she represented. The months that followed were of slow, painful reconstruction. Ryan rented a small apartment, got a modest job at a company where no one knew his last name, and started therapy to understand the roots of his weakness and the toxic dynamics of his family. He didn't ask to come back into Ashley's life, but he made himself present. He brought groceries, assembled the crib, accompanied her to doctor's appointments, always keeping a respectful distance, like someone on a pilgrimage, paying his penance step by step. He was proving his regret not with words, but with consistent actions. Ashley, for her part, focused on herself and her baby. With the truth revealed, an immense weight was lifted from her shoulders. She felt the wound of betrayal, but also saw Ryan's genuine effort to redeem himself. She didn't forgive him overnight. Forgiveness wasn't a switch, but a path she was cautiously beginning to walk. When little Noah was born on a sunny spring morning, Ryan was there holding Ashley's hand, his eyes full of tears of a joy he thought he'd never feel again. As he held his son in his arms for the first time, he looked at Ashley over the baby's small head and whispered, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life being the man you both deserve. I'll protect our family." And Ashley, looking at her son's face, a small miracle that had survived so many storms, and at the man beside her, who had crossed the hell of his own making to find her on the other side, felt the last barrier in her heart give way. She understood that life wasn't about erasing scars, but about learning to live with them, to see them not as marks of weakness, but as testaments to survival. Mrs. Evelyn had stolen her jewelry, almost stolen her peace and her marriage. But she hadn't managed to steal what was most precious, her dignity, her strength as a mother, and finally the chance to have her family back, not as it was before, but something new, stronger, forged in the fire of truth and tempered by the pain of regret. Holding Ryan's hand, which now held Noah's tiny hand, she knew this wasn't the end of the pain, but the true beginning of healing. Together, they would build a new legacy for their son, a legacy based not on gold or status, but on honesty, resilience, and the redemptive power of forgiveness. Peace had finally found its way back home. Now I really want to know your opinion. What did you think of Ashley and Ryan's story? Leave a like on the video, and being totally honest, what score would you give this journey, from 0 to 10? Drop it all in the comments. I'll read and reply as much as I can. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.